All right, we got the history of fighting games. I love fighting games. Always been one of my favorite genres. So I'm just gonna do a little reaction to this one.
What's the best fighting game of all time?
All right, that question right there, best fighting game of all time. That's a tough one. Mortal Kombat 9 is up there. Street Fighter 2 is up there. I don't know. That's a tough one. What do you guys think on that one?
Chances are you'll say either Street Fighter or Smash Bros, depending on your preference for high
Smash
skill
Brothers is
caps
fun.
or arcadiness, though the answers start to break down from there. Street Fighter 2 Turbo or
Yes.
Third Strike,
No.
Melee or Ultimate. Maybe you're one
Ultimate.
of those guys who wants to pull out the third-party candidate with Mortal Kombat 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, or Soul Calibur 2. I can already imagine how Turbo or Third Strike, Melee or Ultimate. Maybe you're one of those guys who wants to pull out the third-party candidate with Mortal Kombat 2,
Mortal Kombat 3. Mortal Kombat 3.
Marvel vs. Capcom 2, or Soul Calibur 2. I can already imagine how many of you are feeling all smug because you thought of Bushido Blade or Skullgirls. My personal vote, Blaze Blue. There's a lot of contenders more than I
forgot
could
about
possibly
Blaze Blue.
mention, so instead of the best, let's just look at the history. How did we arrive where we are today, and what games led us here? Also, what is your favorite fighting game, and why is it better than all the others? Let me know in the comments.
Favorite
The
would be Mortal
biggest
Kombat X.
genres, the oldest and most pure genres, the fighting game starts with the first consoles themselves. There were dozens, hundreds maybe, of fighting games released in the first decade of home consoles.
Really?
And most of them didn't do anything interesting or unique. Arguably, the very first fighting game is Sega's 1976 Heavyweight Champ, a multiplayer boxing arcade game, which was the first game to have fist fighting involved. But fighting games didn't really have anything to aspire to, nothing to emulate. So they
I have
stayed
played that
boxing
one before.
games,
That
and
game
maybe
was
they would have
so
always
bad.
remained boxing games, if not for one young Hollywood superstar. Bruce Lee is the world's most influential martial artist, and his films captivated audiences around the world, and it was no surprise that people wanted to emulate his fights in video games. So, in 1982, you had Atari's Karate, which was the first martial arts game and showed gamers a
What the
glimpse of
fuck is
something
that?
other than boxing. In 1983, you had Sunshine's Sword Fight at Midnight, which was the first fighting game to
Why
have
does that look
fighting
like rifles?
stances and a replay system.
What?
And also Nintendo released Punch-Out, which is the oldest franchise
Punch
still
Out.
produced.
I played Punch-Out as
and
a
also
kid.
the first with a third-person view. In 1984, Sega stepped back into martial arts with Black Belt, which introduced the first tutorial. Broderbund's Karateka was the first handheld fighting game, and Technos Japan released Karate Champ, which would go on to be the first truly successful 1v1 fighting game, again in huge part thanks to Bruce Lee's influences. It also started the
wow.
best of 3 format, introduced bonus stages, and the art style is ridiculously good for the time. Seriously, look at these
You know, I actually thought that Mortal Kombat was the first one to do the best of 3, so that is interesting right there.
animations compared to everything else. Finally, also in 1984, Nintendo released Urban Champion, which is Nintendo's first 1v1 fighter, and I think it has some really clear Smash Bros. Features. Environmental dangers, light and heavy attacks, and the goal is to push the other player off the edge into
just
a
threw a
manhole.
plant.
Then in 1987, Street Fighter introduced special attacks, blocking, and light, medium, and heavy attacks. All of these are incrementally
I did know
influential
that.
to the
I
games
did know
come
that
after
that
them,
was
but it's
before
really hard to
Mortal
say
Kombat.
that any of them were the big bad granddaddy of fighting games. It's a stew, a witch's brew. And if you threw in this crew and gave it a skew or two, you'd get something brand new that's still imbued with all the kung fu and a crude worldview that you're used to. The tried and true meets a new point of view. We get a little deja vu, but break through into a new purview. And so comes Street Fighter II. Yes, Street Fighter II is released in 1991, and it
love
is
Street
the
Fighter
great
2.
granddaddy, the big boy on the block, the revolutionary game. You can see its DNA in those earlier games. It is a mishmash of all the other things, but it's done brilliantly and nearly flawlessly. So well done that there are around 50 different ports, upgraded versions, updated versions, collections and additions, and so on.
50?
With the latest one released in 2018. 27 years later.
I did know
That's
that.
how we get
I played
Super
that
Street
one.
Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix and Super Street Fighter 2 X Grandmaster Challenge. It's the progenitor of the really long video game name. What's funny in retrospect is that Capcom once wasn't even entirely sure they'd make a sequel to Street Fighter, thanks to its poor sales. Only made more humorous when you consider that it sold 6.3 million units in its first year, and by 1994 it had sold over 25 million units. Imagine
my
if you'd been the
God.
executive to say no. Street Fighter II was revolutionary. It started the renaissance for fighting games, an international super hit that
the
today
car.
is still considered the standard for fighting games, leading to one excellent live-action movie with a surprisingly good original soundtrack, by the way. Seriously, go look it up on Spotify.
That
It's
movie
in the
was so
description.
bad it
and
was
also
good.
one not very great movie, animes, all sorts of licensed things. It's a huge property that's influential even outside of gaming, and that's because of how influential it is to gaming. It's not the prettiest, though it is pretty. It wasn't the most technologically advanced, but it had a far more involved learning curve, way more replay value, a unique roster of characters with their own fighting styles, and even special moves for each character, meaning that you could become really good with just one character. Plus, the accuracy of the joysticks on the arcade cabinets was miles ahead of the competition, so you could be good. Not RNG good, but actually good. Plus, it gave kids around the world the sound for pretending to throw fireballs at their friends. Just
How
a
did
year
I not
later,
know that
gaming
was
would get
coming?
another massive fighting franchise with Mortal Kombat, a game so violent, so grotesque.
So back in the arcades when I was a kid, I believe Mortal Kombat 2 was the first one I played in the arcade, and then on the Super Nintendo, I got Mortal Kombat 3. I never played the original until like a couple years ago. We used to go to the mall. The mall had an arcade. My mom would get like her nails done or her hair done, and she would just give us a bunch of quarters, me and my brothers. And me and my oldest brother used to play Mortal Kombat in the arcade. Our mom never knew what it was. She bought it for us on the Super Nintendo, never paid attention to what it was. Looking back, if she knew, I don't think she would have bought it for us.
So disgusting, so detrimental to kids and culture and society itself that Congress attempted to ban video games and set up huge congressional hearings to discuss whether or not these nerds had finally gone too far. This martial arts game was designed to be a game about Jean-Claude Van Damme. But they never struck a deal, and so Jean-Claude became Johnny Cage, and Mortal Kombat took the world by storm. Fatalities erupted everywhere as kids around the world started begging their older siblings to rent the game for them, because no way was Mom letting that filth into her home.
What did I just
Don't you dare
talk
bring
about?
that devil worship into my house. This is a house of Jesus.
In fact, it's still banned in some countries, and the newer versions are often automatically banned by countries like Australia, a place that hates
Really?
violent video games, because they worry you might see the desolation and horror and consider moving. After this, you had one last major jump for several years, the 3D Fighter. Heralded by Virtua Fighter. Everyone wanted this game because
Was not a
look
big
at
fan
how
of that
good
one.
the graphics are. They're so 3D, and they move and are definitely 3D.
graphics
It was
are
considered to be
fucking terrible.
easier to learn, easier to play, and just so 3D. For reference as to how very popular this game was, the Sega Saturn and Virtua Fighter sold 1 for 1. Everyone who had the Saturn
Wow.
had this game. And then, nothing really huge happened to fighting games for a while. Not to say that the
What is
games
that one?
released weren't good. Some of them are fantastic. They just never really took over in the
I don't
same
recognize
way.
those
King of
characters. Oh.
Fighters, Tekken, Soul Edge, Dead or Alive, Bushido Blade, X-Men
my
vs.
God.
Street Fighter.
Oh my God,
All
X-Men
released in the
vs.
last
Street
half of
Fighter
the
is a
1990s
classic.
and all
So
worthwhile.
bad, but
Ultimately,
so much
however,
fun.
fighters were on a decline. The games were becoming incredibly complicated, hard to learn, and even harder to master. And during a time that more players than ever were joining the hobby. If the first fighting game you picked up was Guilty Gear, you probably never picked up another one.
The hell
this
game is
coupled with
that?
the decline of the
Marvel vs.
arcade, and fighting
Capcom.
games became much more niche. In order to expand out of some of these very small niches,
Marvel vs.
many developers
Capcom 3
began
was the
working
best one.
on crossover games.
2 was
you
up
might
there.
have recognized one of those already, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, the future games of which were known as Marvel vs. Capcom. You also saw SNK vs. Capcom, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, and Super Smash.
Hold on.
You also
hold
saw
on.
SNK vs. Capcom, Mortal Kombat vs.
Underrated game. It gets a lot of hate. Is it the best game? Fuck no. Underrated. I will stand by that. I still love that game. I go back and play it every once in a while. Is it good? By no means is it anywhere near the level of like MK9 or MKX or even MK1. MK1 is a little overrated to me. But underrated. This game gets way too much hate.
versus DC Universe, and Super Smash Bros. This series was and is
I still play that
one of the
game,
biggest
too.
fighting
I
games.
love Super
period.
Smash Brothers.
Melee, Brawl, Ultimate, all incredibly high-selling games that helped solidify the idea of a crossover fighting game, to the point that creating any crossover fighting game just sounds like you're making a Smash knockoff. The goal is to win in a 2, 3, or 4-player versus match, where you knock the other players off the edge a set number of times until their lives are depleted and you are the winner. A brief look again at Urban Champion, just so we can clarify that this concept was refined for a decade before it even came out, and as of Ultimate has been refined for almost 30 years. That's a huge part of why the core
I love
gameplay
Smash
just
Bros. Ultimate.
feels
I
so
love
good. The first game sold 1 million copies, the second sold 7 million copies, and Ultimate
Wow.
has sold over 20 million copies and pulled
I bought,
itself
like,
into the
2 of
number
those,
one
so-
best-selling fighting game franchise at the same time. In the middle of all these
That's crazy.
really good Smash games, Sony also wanted to get in on it and make a game. And they made PlayStation All-Stars, a game that my buddy Bolt did an incredible postmortem on because that game died harder than the Ouya. The video is linked in the
That game
description.
was
It's worth
terrible.
your 12 minutes. These games pretty much show the divisions in the history story of the fighting game. Bruce Lee, or the pre-Street Fighter II era, the Street Fighter II era, Mortal Kombat, or the post-Street Fighter II era, 3D fighters, and then crossovers. You could make an argument that we are now in the post-arcade era, as Street Fighter V, Marvel v. Capcom 3, and others no longer release in arcades. Plus, some of the most exciting fighting games have been indie releases. Skullgirls and Brawl Stars, each with tens
played Brawl
of
Stars.
millions of players and not a single quarter being shoved into an arcade cabinet. You could also call the modern era the pro era, as fighting games are truly established now as one of the pillars of esports. It's not CSGO or Quake, but EVO, the Evolution Championship Series, and many other tournaments are thriving, both in person, at least in the before times, and on Twitch, where tournaments in games like Street Fighter, Tekken, Smash Bros, and Mortal Kombat attract thousands of entrants, and big-name, high-dollar signing bonuses for top players. While it's undeniable that the late 90s into almost 2010 was essentially the worst period of the fighting game community, the arrival of Street Fighter V in 2009, the popularity of Smash Bros, and the availability of streaming has really pulled the fighter back from the edge. Thank you so much to everyone who shares this video. You guys really help me out so much, and I appreciate it.
All right, so so I really think fighting games have really come a long way, even just since I was a kid, which I'm not going to say how long ago that was. But from growing up playing Mortal Kombat, excuse the cat, he wants attention. I'll give him attention once I hit stop record. But anyways, yeah, I really think, I'm not sure how old this video is. I guess it's a little bit old, because it didn't say anything about Mortal Kombat, even Mortal Kombat 9. Well, it did have a clip of, I believe, Mortal Kombat X in there. But anyways, yeah, just fighting games has always been one of my favorite genres. Fighting games and like kind of third-person shooter, like Fallout is one of my favorite series. But yeah, it's crazy to see like how far the game. Okay, there he goes. It's crazy to see like how far things have come since like the 80s. I had no idea that a couple of those games even existed. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. Sorry, no gameplay. I know y'all enjoy watching me get my butt kicked, but yeah, that's going to be it for me today. I will see y'all in the next one. Bye.